climate change is a non sequitur. It doesn't really mean anything because the climate is always changing. So the position I take on what is really causing it. And the data seem to show that there is a non-zero effect of human anthropogenic emissions, so this would be gases like CO2 and of course methane, which is a byproduct of dairying. Methane is a much more potent greenhouse gas, but it has a much lower environmental half-life. The issue is it the only cause of climate change? No, it's not. Because the huge portion of the variation in climate is actually due to variations in solar output. And is it the main cause of climate change? This is obviously very controversial, but my position is, no, it's not. My position is it's a sort of co-equal contributor along with these other solar-type mechanisms. The thing I will take a strong position on this that these claims that have been made by Michael Mann and others about modern environments being far warmer than at any point in the last 1,000 years is complete nonsense. Those data are, in my opinion, not to be trusted. That data are hokey. And if you actually look at real climatological reconstructions using multiple converging lines of things like ice core thicknesses, ratio of oxygen isotopes, tree ring thicknesses, that sort of thing. You take all of these different converging lines of evidence and you plot back in time, you can actually see periods in relatively recent history, the so-called medieval warm period, where the average temperature, particularly during the time of the Roman occupation, was so high in the north of Europe that you could actually grow grapes. You could have viniculture. You could make wine, have vineyards. It's been forgotten that you get vineyard streets in various medieval towns because it was a lot warmer during this early medieval period, and then it got a lot colder during the so-called Little Ice Age. The Little Ice Age corresponds with the Maunder Minimum, which is a period of reduced sunspot activity. And as soon as the Maunder Minimum came to an end, the Little Ice Age came to an end, and we started to pull out of it. This climate change was very, very civilizationally important. I make it absolutely central to my own models of how recent human evolution has occurred. Because what climate is doing, both the level of temperature within the environment, the mean temperature, and also the variance in temperature, the number of very warm and very cold days that you have for a given period of time, what you're looking at, there is a major driver of selection for traits like intelligence and also life history, because of the way that temperature affects both the scarcity and also the predictability of resources and the impact that this ecological stability has on traits, in terms of the traits that are favoured under these regimes of different degrees of ecological harshness and predictability. You have different levels of group selection in response to this. There's a very good paper by the Jean Group which was published, actually 2 of them published in Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, which they show that you can use variations in the levels of temperature to actually predict levels of violence and into group conflict among European populations. And yes, when temperatures started to drop and you entered into this Maunder Minimum period, this Little Ice Age, you had this explosion of violence in Europe. You had things like the 30 Years' War, and you have this thing called the General Crisis of the 17th century, and this was all driven by cold and by famine and by the desire for more northerly groups to expand into more southerly and more clement environments to basically take those resources, to make up for the resources that they had lost due to the imposition of the climate. So group selection is a response to cold, and group selection is what stimulates selection for high IQ or high G. When you have a climate that's changing in a warming direction, as has been happening over the last 200 years, in part due to the Industrial Revolution, and in part due to the end of the Little Ice Age, you have a situation which the opposite is going to happen. You will have a mild environment, you won't need group selection, and therefore you have dysgenic selection patterns arising as a consequence.